I am Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, making sense of middle school. Right from the top of the show, I want to let you know that even though the title says middle school, it's still a great conversation even if you are not raising a middle schooler. Ultimately, it's about who we are as people and how middle school shapes us, both as kids and as parents. What do you remember about middle school? Who were you at age 13? Is that 13-year-old still inside of you? Do you think any of those memories have haunted you or shaped your actions in the present, even without your knowledge? My special guest today is brilliant journalist and astute observer of human behavior, Judith Werner. She's the author of the new book, And Then They Stopped Talking to Me, Making Sense of Middle School. She's best known for her 2005 New York Times bestseller, Perfect Madness, Motherhood in the Age of Anxiety, and New York Times column, Domestic Disturbances. She is currently completing a journalism fellowship for the Women Donors Network's Reflective Democracy campaign. Her last book, We've Got Issues, Children and Parents in the Age of Medication, won multiple awards from mental health advocacy and education organizations, including the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. In this episode, we discuss why the middle school years are so painful, how parents unwittingly make them worse, and what we all need to do to grow up. We delve into how an adult's perspective of middle school can influence a child's experience of it, why it's so important to understand our role in the middle school experience. Judith walks us through a new understanding of the role that middle school plays in our lives. She encourages us to start treating middle schoolers as the complex people they are. If your child's middle school journey is unraveling you, first of all, you are not alone. I have a 13-year-old. Second, you are especially going to love this conversation. Please enjoy this insightful, fresh, and mind-opening conversation with Judith Werner. Judith, welcome to Authentic Parenting.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am absolutely delighted you're here. I love this book on many levels. This is one of my favorite types of books to read, as you perfectly weave in research, which is like enormous, what you have gone through, which
Thank you.
So like, wow, this woman has some patience and curiosity and like hard work. Your own stories, the tips for the parents. It's not the how-to book, but you can gain a lot of how-tos. So the combination of all of those and the great storytelling and the interviews that you have done, I think what makes this book a unique, remarkable, and original.
Well, I really appreciate that. I loved doing the research. It was so fascinating to me. And there was a real opening for me because it didn't exist already. I wanted to really try to focus in on early adolescence, the middle school period, and understand why it is that we have the kind of, in the US, stock reactions to it that we do. People either shout raging hormones and kind of walk away, to shut down the conversation, or they sort of turn white and pull into themselves and are terrified at the mere memory of it. And as a parent, when my daughters got to be that age, I noticed that I and everyone else were just filled with this kind of dread. And I thought, why? Why is it this way? Why do we assume it has to be this way? And is it this way everywhere? Was it always? So that, those were the questions that kind of animated it. And it was really interesting to see that, well, no one else had exactly approached it that way before. And so the whole path was ahead of me.
What I love about even starting from the title and the subtitle is I love the dual directionality, for a lack of a better word, of this book. This title is, and then they stopped talking to me, and subtitle making sense of middle school. This can get interpreted both ways, right? From the experience of the middle schooler, and as in friends stop talking to me, they feel excluded. And the middle schooler is trying to make sense of their own experience. And the parent who has a middle schooler who is also trying to make sense of middle school and their children. Like I have a 7th grader whose birthday is actually today. She's turning 13.
Oh, happy birthday to her.
Thank you. Whose favorite phrase is, leave me alone. Stop talking to me. So I love the dual directions of this book. And you provide such rich content for both, for me understanding myself as a parent now and helping my middle schooler and making sense of both of those areas, and me understanding my own middle school experiences, which, let me tell you, I had tucked away, and this book revealed so much. I started thinking like who I was at that age. And it was very revealing. And I took a pause to think about my own experiences and how they shaped who I am today or how I relate to my daughter. So I think it's a phenomenal thing what you've done here.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I have to say, I'm just so happy because I feel really seen in all my intentions for the book. And I'm also so glad that you do see that what you call the dual directionality of the title, because when I wrote it, I completely meant it in terms of my own 8th grade experience of coming in and finding that no one was talking to me, and just the horror of that, which I discovered as I just got older. And then certainly as I was interviewing adults for the book, that's a pretty common experience in different forms, but it was in no way unique to me. And that's what I was thinking about for the title. I only realized when the book was in production that people were understanding it the other way, as being from the parents' perspective, because that's how the art department understood it. And my editor and I realized, well, all the better that it works in both directions, because in truth, I am writing about both experiences, what it is to be a kid that age where the world does not make sense to you, and what it is to be a parent where you have this sort of shock of loss right at the beginning of middle school, where your child changes from being the cuddly little person who adores you to somebody who says you're useless or, doesn't want to talk to you.
Yes. I think, the focus of this podcast, excuse me, the focus of our podcast is how our issues from the past, unresolved grief, traumas, adversity, whatever we went through as young adults or children, how they impact the way we parent today. And I think when we enter the Middle Ages and we have middle schoolers, as I am in that era of my life, I feel like all of those issues become bigger, more amplified, like in the forefront of our mind somehow. We knew that our past affects our parenting, but now it's even more of an imperative almost.
I think that's absolutely true. And my first impetus really for writing the book came when my second daughter was in middle school. In fact, I found the email that contained the germ of the idea recently, like right before the book came out. I had written to the school counselor because the girls were having some drama. And I didn't write to the counselor about this, but I was also aware that the moms of the girls were having way more complicated drama. And I just said in an email to her, I wonder who the seventh graders are who are walking around inside of us. She didn't respond, but I had seen her in action as well and had noticed that there was a lot going on. And I was just aware that our behavior was strange. It was different than it had been in the past. It was a K-8 school, so we'd all been together for a long time. And since it was my second daughter, this was my second time around as a middle school parent. And so I was able to have a bit more of an anthropological view, which is always sort of self-protective the second time around, compared to the first. And I was just really curious because I did see this behavior shift in the parents. I saw this, what I would call middle schoolerish behavior in the sense of, oh my gosh, talking behind people's back, one person saying, don't listen to the other one, she lies all the time, just ridiculous kind of stuff, but also, some really odd, irrational behavior, withholding grudges and, just childish stuff that was out of character, let's say, for the people I'd seen before. And in myself, I think at least that my behavior was okay. I'm not sure, but I know that on the inside, I was really torn up. I was less torn up by the behavior of the kids, if my children suffered, because they seemed to be not so bad. They were not as bad as I remembered, from being that age. But I was very torn up by the behavior of the parents when they got involved in the drama or when they behaved in ways, if they were friends of mine, they behaved in ways that showed me that they didn't actually care about my kids, that they were so narrowly focused on kind of putting their own children forward and what they perceived to be the needs and desires of their own children, that they were willing to step on others. And that for me actually was extraordinarily painful. And in telling it like that, I mean, maybe that's how my own 7th or 8th grade self got brought back to life. You see what I mean? In the sense of being ill-treated by friends, although, as you say, these were middle-aged women. And I think you're really onto something when you talk about the fact that all of this comes back a whole lot more strongly, and the issue of past and present colliding really happens with added strength, I think, in this middle school / middle age period.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that around me. I think because the kids are older, they're capable of more. So sort of parents expect more. They can perform, they can do sports, they can do a lot of things. So parents become overly identified with their kids. As a parent, as an adult, you can't compete, or you can't see yourself in your 5-year-old, and you can, but with an older kid, it's a lot sort of it's blurred. The boundaries are blurred. I think, especially for people, I don't want to sound judgmental, but especially for people who have issues or challenges with their authentic self, being connected to themselves, they sort of don't see the boundaries of where they start and end and where their child begins and ends. And so they sort of live through their children, they become their children. And I had a mom who took her daughter's phone and texted her daughter's friend a nasty text, trying to resolve a teenage conflict. And she saw nothing wrong with her behavior. You know what I mean? So we need to understand that our children are separate human beings. This is their life. They have rights and privacy and friendships. And because I think the move from elementary, that sweet child, they listen to us, they do what we say, the move into this preteen teen years is so drastic and hormonal and huge. Many parents are shell-shocked. It comes with a sense of loss. Where is my sweet boy or my girl? They don't know how to navigate this. They become overprotective in controlling ways. They increase the control as opposed to, nurturing more autonomy, just the opposite. And it just backfires. There's a lot of misunderstandings. Like young teens feel misunderstood a lot by their parents.
And they are. And they're
Yeah.
also, this is an age group that has long been disliked. And just to add to the research you were talking about what parents experience at that age, what it feels like, there are a number of studies that show that parents just feel worse about themselves as parents at this point in their child's development. There is the phrase was a decrease in a sense of self-efficacy. They feel like they're not so good at being parents anymore. And life becomes so much more complicated. The problems become more complex, and they don't necessarily feel like they're, effective in being able to deal with them. And that feeling of powerlessness or helplessness really is panicking, because they know that this is such an important phase in their children's lives. They remember from that age how painful things could be. And they want so badly to do right by their kids. I mean, that's the underlying motivation. Even if the behavior takes bad forms, underneath it all is simply the desire really to do well by their kids. And they don't know how. And that just drives sometimes almost a kind of desperation to just do something. And I think what ends up happening with many of us, and I would include myself in this, we don't have the adult tools, the mature, better tools to navigate some of these situations. The tools that we know are the ones that we had when we were our kids' age. And we unfortunately fall back on them without realizing that there are other tools possible, because no one ever directly showed us, told us, talked to us about it, or really gave us access to those tools.
Yeah. In working with parents, I tell parents that you need to upgrade your relational repertoire, your parenting toolbox, your skills, even how you approach parenting when your children hit this age. Because what worked before, right, your parenting strategies, whatever you were doing was working great. You developed a confidence and a style as a parent, but you need to upgrade because your children are now in a completely different stage of life. And unless you upgrade, unless you change your lens or start relating to your children as who they really are, like evolving selves, right? This is the first time that your sense of self emerges so like richly and vividly. And right, it's like it imprints your entire life. And you talk about this, and I want you to mention this in this conversation. Towards the end of your book, you mentioned that you found some of your 8th grade writings. And in what way were you surprised? What did you discover? Because I have a story of my own too.
Oh, I would love to hear that. Basically, my mother was cleaning out her apartment and she found all these old papers of mine. And one of the things that she found was something I had written. I can tell from what I'm describing that it's 2 weeks before the end of 8th grade, because I say only 2 more weeks and then I'm out of here. And it looks like it is a very long set of answers to a questionnaire. And my guess is that the questionnaire was maybe in 17 magazine or something similar, because the questions are a combination of, all about you and then mixed in bits of things about your personal style. So that sort of makes it make sense to me. And I wish I still had this personality that I had at the time. It's all perfectly written out in this very neat handwriting, and everything is, answered in exquisite detail and so orderly. But what's funny is the descriptions of who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, what I loved in life at that point, my best friend, who's still my best friend, they all held up over the decades afterwards. At that point, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to live in France. Those things remained all the way through adulthood. I mean, I did live in France before coming to Washington, D.C. I wanted to become fluent in French. That ambition stayed for the rest of my life. I adored my best friend, and I still absolutely adore her. the thing that was shocking to me was that the writing style, the voice was so similar to my voice now. It was less self-aware. So it was obnoxious in certain ways that I hate to say this, corresponded to the things people didn't like about me back then. And I wasn't aware of it. And so I hope at least I'm different in that sense, although I think I still sometimes make mistakes in writing that bring on the same reactions from people, although it's unintentional. But one other thing I did notice is that my intellect was far in advance of my actual understanding, or maybe let me say that differently. My powers of observation outpaced my ability to make sense of what I was seeing. So there are really great descriptions of my parents, for example. I mean, very accurate descriptions, but they are cobbled by lack of context and lack of understanding. And I think that told me a lot about where middle schoolers are, let's say, in their social interactions or in the way they relate to their parents or the world at large. And I can remember too, I read enormously. I always was a kid who spent most of her life reading. And I, at that point in time, was really trying to make sense of myself in the context of the larger world in ways that were often not very good because of what I was reading. I internalized a lot of not nice stuff. And that's where kids need help, because they can be quite accurate, let's say, in reporting what's going on, what's around them, perceiving what's around them, but they don't have the intellectual context, the information, the empathy, and just the life experience. They're young to be able to see the big picture and on a much deeper level, make sense of what's happening to them. And it just became so clear to me reading this that I would have so benefited from that kind of adult intervention at the time. So that, for example, with my story of everyone not talking to me, I could have had the ability to displace myself for a moment and think about what was going on with the others, or at least with the girl who was driving it. Wouldn't have excused the behavior, but I could have come away from it feeling less like a powerless victim and more like somebody who had some insight and could say, all right, she's acting like this probably because X, and I've played into this a bit by being like this. I can change my piece of it, and I can see her not as this huge, powerful monster, but as somebody who's going through a really hard time and who's dealing with it badly. That's where I really think we need to intervene as adults.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is why we need to take our children seriously. Who they are, what's their inner world is shaping and developing so rapidly at this stage. Just to add a little bit my own a story, because I love talking about this subject. I wrote an essay when I was 13, and I still have it. And I wanted to get it out of the garage to show it to you, but it's in my.
Please do.
It's in my
after this.
After this, it's in my handwriting, the way you exactly describe. And I really worked hard to be a certain type of person and have a certain type of handwriting, which looks nothing like mine today, of course. However, I found a few things. One is that essay that says "My Dream." And in that essay, I write, I want to become a psychologist. I want to work with children, with orphans. I want to serve children, the mission of children, how attachments are so important, mother-child bond. Everything I talk about today, who I am today, in a more pompous, exaggerated, intellectual way, kind of obnoxious. And I'm like, who was I? Like, who was thinking in those terms? Like at age 13, like, wow, is that possible? But let me tell you, everything in that essay became true in my life, exactly like for you. You went to France, the writer, and all of this. This is why we need to take our children so seriously, because they are who they are. Another thing I found was another questionnaire, exactly like yours. I guess those were popular at that time. Exactly, word by word, I am the same person. I like the same color. I love the same artists. I love the same books. Like my tastes, my outlook to world and things. I'm like, holy cow, like I guess we never change. We acquire layers, but that basic, essential core sense that emerges at this age in this like big blossoming way only takes shape. That core stays unshakably the same.
Absolutely. And
Right?
oh, I love hearing you say this. And even the thing about the handwriting, because I remember when I was that age, I had this piece of paper where I had invented different handwritings that corresponded to different girls, different characters, sort of. I mean, I was, this sounds almost schizophrenic or something, but, I was an only child who lived in her head a lot and wanted to be a writer. So I suppose these were characters I was creating. And I hated my handwriting because my handwriting was too much like old childhood me. I think my father had made the mistake of once saying, your handwriting looks just like mine when I was your age, and then it had to be shed. But so I had adopted a handwriting that I thought corresponded to the kind of girl I wanted to be, which I could not sustain. My handwriting now is just a disaster because it wasn't authentic. That's the thing. I adopted this inauthentic whatever, which couldn't be sustained. But it's like you're telling my own life in what you're saying right now. And the larger takeaway, I think, though, is that teachers who work with kids this age now in this generation really love kids this age. That's why they do it. They choose to specialize. And when you hear them talk about kids this age, they talk about all of these things that you're raising about. It's so exciting to work with them because they're really coming into their own intellectually, and they're so open and they're so excited. And yet in pop culture and as parents generally out in the world, we don't talk about them like that. And we basically haven't for the past century. We talk about them as, unfortunately, we reduce them to their quote unquote hormones, meaning they're sort of coming into being as sexual beings in a kind of yucky, gross way, right? We reduce everything to that in the crudest possible terms. And we write them off as being essentially just being jerks, being the worst elements of humanity who have to be locked up together in these schools where they're just with other kids their age so that the rest of the world is protected from them. Americans have been talking about kids this age in that way ever since the point when parents started spending more time with them, which is in the mid to late 19th century. And I think that's something we really need to do something about. And that perhaps is why middle school, junior high before that, it's for most kids been an exercise in misery for the past century, because this sort of disdain and dislike of adults is really kind of built right into the walls of those schools, unless a kid is lucky enough to land in a school where the administrators and the teachers are able to kind of push back against the kind of institutional weight of so many, many decades of bad feeling and neglect in a certain sense.
Yeah, I have worked many years with this age group as a psychologist, as an educator. So for me, parenting my own 13-year-old now is, I'm not going to say it's easy, because when it's your own, it's difficult. Also, I have lost my mom when I was 13. So I have my own set of issues, right? So I'm very aware of how I was feeling when I was 13, growing up without my mom, alone, and not knowing what to do when the period came and when all of those things. So I'm really aware of my own issues. But I think I am better than most parents in regards what we just talked about, seeing her as her own separate human being, because I remember that so vividly, that it was so important for me. And my father, he was a great dad. He honored that. He didn't want me to change who I was. And like you, I thought about that this was an important period in my life that like shaped who I was. Even my today's haircut is the one I chose when I was at that age. It meant something for me. And only recently I cut my hair to look the haircut that I had before. So yes, I'm a different person, multi-layered and everything, but that part of that 12-year-old, that 13-year-old is still big part of myself. So I am very careful not harming that in my child. And I have worked with kids many years in a correctional facility with juvenile delinquents who were at this age. And so I have this background that gives me an advantage. But boy, it's hard when it's your own child, it can it can be really emotionally triggering and sometimes hopeless. You don't know, what's the right thing.
And I have found consistently now in the present, but also looking back over the decades, that there's this gulf between the way that experts and specialists look at kids this age and the way that parents do based on what they're getting out of pop culture. There's a true gulf. And you're fortunate in that you're on the expert side and you're a parent. So you bring that expert knowledge to bear on your relationship in the present. But most of us don't have access to that. I didn't have access to it before I went and did all the research that you talked about. And it isn't that there aren't parenting books, and there are good parenting books out there, for telling parents, do this, not that. But I guess I wanted more of the big picture framework of understanding why we think what we do and how and why we could think differently. And so I can imagine you have that background. And so your daughter's very fortunate that she's able to benefit from that knowledge in you. I'm curious about one thing, so much I think of what happens in early adolescence, especially with girls, is the kind of push-pull with their mothers, of, am I like her? I don't want to be like her, but that kind of thing. The fact that you did lose your mother at that age, how do you think that affected, that piece of your development?
Good question. I became parentified. I took care of my dad and my brother at that age. So I became the caregiver, the cook, the cleaner, and the child. So that brought a lot of set of issues, right? Being overly responsive and sort of having lost my own childhood and things like that. In terms of shaping like my identity as a woman, I think I did struggle in a lot of ways growing up more than now. I would say for sure, growing up, I did struggle with that. But in terms of being a woman, an adult, maybe I'm not even aware what I have, but the things that I'm conscious and aware, I think I had other influences, luckily, right? I had two grandmothers who were very involved. I had aunts who were very involved, a neighbor women who were very involved and who loved me as their daughter, and stuff like that. I think those women definitely shaped my own womanhood and identity. But when I was becoming a mom, when I first discovered that I'm having a daughter, I lost it at the technician's office. I said, "Oh my gosh, I don't think I can be a mom to a girl because I don't think I can. I thought I couldn't, but that is why I had this idea that I need to have a boy. So it's like easier to parent a boy. It doesn't matter if you have a boy or a girl, you are a parent. So you bring your issues no matter what. But I think what I'm afraid of in my parenting, and this is very honest thought I have, because I didn't have my my mom with me, I'm afraid to be too aloof or too cut off or too disengaged, which I'm not. If you knew me, I'm a very engaged, hands-on, present parent. But somehow I have that fear, and I don't know if that's a founded fear or just some unfounded, irrational fear.
I was going to say, obviously not knowing you beyond this session, that I am sure that's not what you're like. I can just tell. But where did you grow up?
I grew up in Armenia. I came to the United States when I was 27. So, yeah.
the best friend I was talking about is part Armenian.
Oh, there you go.
So
Very, very
as a result, I just knew a number of Armenian people growing up because her mother and grandfather were part of a community in New York.
Yeah, I think if I were to judge my relationship with my daughter, definitely it's a healthy one. Of course, I make mistakes. Of course, I yell at times and use threats and whatever. But comparably, since I'm working with parents, parents always ask me, how can you keep your cool and your perspective? And I don't know why. Maybe because of my expertise, like you said, or the work experience, or because I didn't have a mother and I have that blank sort of file in my head that is not fraught with a lot of emotional stuff, right? I don't know, but I am able to see her as her own person and just listen. Like, you don't have to do much. Ask some curious questions and let them just talk, and help them generate insight into their world, into their friendships. And I think, we think we have to parent and get into micromanaging every detail. But I think as they get older, we need to give them that autonomy, that freedom, because I don't know how about you, and I'll ask you this, what you remember from that period of your life, what you enjoyed the most. For me, it was the freedom, the taste of
absolutely.
freedom.
Absolutely. That was the moment when, with my best friend, I started to really explore Manhattan beyond the areas that I already knew. I mean, it was compared to kids now. I mean, we had a lot more freedom anyway, even though the city was dangerous, which it really isn't now, Manhattan at least. I guess the whole city is far less dangerous, but I grew up in downtown Manhattan and went to school in Greenwich Village. So starting probably around maybe 6th grade, we spent a lot of time on 8th Street, which then had fun stores and a big bookstore, unsurprisingly, where I spent a lot of my Saturdays. But with my best friend, we started, we'd take the subway, we'd go to all these different neighborhood stores, museums, walk around, look at things. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was like, I don't know, being some kind of incredible explorer, seeing neighborhoods I hadn't seen before. And, everything is new at that point. I noticed that with my daughters when they're that age. You go into stores and it isn't like being us where you've seen everything a million times before. Everything is new and interesting. And that's what I remember just loving so much. That and reading. But yeah, and unfortunately, that's something I wanted to be able to give my kids at that age. And it was difficult, partly because living in Washington, not Manhattan, where you're more car dependent, partly in one case because I had an anxious child who didn't want to go out and explore. And in the case of the other, a child who very much did want to, but the other parents, in her school at least, were so anxious about whatever danger might exist, even though we're in an incredibly safe area, that it became a drama. It became a big drama. And that was very unfortunate. And that frankly reminded me a lot of negative things in my own childhood, with having a sort of overly anxious father who made life much harder as a result. I'm so fascinated by what you said earlier about the fact that we don't over-identify with our babies and very young children, our 5-year-olds. It really is just when they get to be that age that we can see ourselves in them, that gross over-identification begins. That's an insight that is not articulated the way you articulated it in the book. And I think that's such an important thing to hold on to.
Yeah, I love the book and the depth of it. I can sense, what kind of person you are by just reading the book. I mean, there's so much to talk about this topic. Let's see. I also want to know, like, after having done all of this research and have written the book, is there anything you regret? Like, you just learned something you didn't know before. Do you wish you knew before, when you were parenting your children when they were at middle school age?
All of it, honestly. I wish I had known. I felt so alone and unsupported, other than one of my daughters was seeing a therapist who was just wonderful. And she was like an anchor, to be able to make sense of things for me and to guide. And that was incredible. But, in terms of making sense of social dynamics, whether among the kids or the adults, let's say, or making sense of what precisely was getting triggered in me. I wish I had known then what I know now, because I could have been, I think, a lot more helpful to my daughters than I was able to be. I don't think I was particularly bad. I don't think I took them in bad directions. And one at least feels like I was helpful to her. But what the book research did for me in terms of sort of parenting knowledge I didn't have before was providing me with a vocabulary and an intellectual framework for being able to move beyond the sort of moralistic, judgmental categories that we usually draw upon as parents to think about how kids are behaving to one another. That this one is mean, that one is immature, that one is too mature, that, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. To instead look at these kids as being at different points on a spectrum of development where it's all normal, that there's this huge range, right? There are all kinds of different ways to be at 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe even, I've read a wider range, let's say, of developmental normal than at different points. And to look at that without judgment. There's the typical story that happens to, adults telling me this story or parents talking about what was tough for their kids is that elementary school and 6th grade, 7th grade comes and one friend is quote unquote dumped by another. And it's extraordinarily painful. And the one who is left behind wonders what's wrong with him or her and, tries to keep the friendship going or to remake themselves and doesn't. And I just think that if parents could have the vocabulary to say, you know what, you guys are moving in different directions right now. That's fine. That's what happens at your age. It's an age where people really change a lot and they move in a lot of different directions. And, maybe someday you'll find each other again, or maybe you're just turning into different people. Why don't you look around for people who are kind of into what you're into right now? And maybe it's going to be different people than you were friends with in the past. To be able to talk about it that way rather than, oh my God, this is so terrible. How are you going to get back in? Would just be so helpful, I think. I just feel like we bring so much judgment to the way we look at the kids, and it's deeply unhelpful. It misses the point completely and it backfires completely.
Yeah. And again, we keep reiterating, I think, coming to the same point at large, that it's your child, it's their experience, it's their friendships, it's their feelings. Can you separate yours from theirs? If your child is going through social drama, sometimes parents take it so deeply, the suffering, the pain of it, that they want to alleviate the pain of their child. Here, let me give you an example from my life. With this pandemic, with remote school, it was hard, right? For all of us, for us as well. I had a conversation with my husband, like he was trying to help in any way to make our daughter's life experience easier and homework. And he was trying to be too involved, overly involved. And I used a phrase, I said, look, like if she wants to fail, we can talk to her, we can encourage her, but we can't make her per se do those things. She needs to learn her own lessons. This is her life. This is an adversity, a good moment in her life, an opportunity. Even if she needs to fail, she needs to fail and get up. And my husband says to me, so you want her to fail? No, that's not what I want. I don't want to rub my children off of learning and growing opportunities because I am an anxious, stressed out, insecure parent, or I want her to succeed so I will look good in the eyes of the teacher, or for whatever other reason. That's how I differ with my husband. Like I'm able to separate that this is my kid's life. But a lot of parents want to alleviate the pain when they see that their daughter is getting nasty text, is getting excluded from a friend group. They take it way too personally. Like I'm wondering what kinds of, words of wisdom or hope or insightful things you would say to that parent.
Well, in the first instance with the academics, and I mean, experts have been saying this for a long time, and I never understood it, to be perfectly honest, until recently. The necessity of natural consequences. That's the phrase that is meaningful to me. We do try to save our children from academic failure, right? All the time because of the feeling that, oh, if they get on a bad track, they're going to be on a bad track forever, or it'll be so devastating for them that it'll somehow knock them out and they won't be able to get back up. But the problem is, if you don't experience some natural consequences early on, and then and as a family, you keep that pattern going, you end up potentially, with a kid who can't really function independently when the time comes, or who, when they do encounter failures, setbacks, doesn't have the resilience to bounce back. It's just devastating. So middle school is the perfect time to practice that because the stakes in truth are not very high, right? So if they don't do their work and they get a bad grade as a result, okay, well then they can see how they feel about that, because more likely than not, they're not going to feel good about that. And then they can problem solve for how to do better in the future. I think we do try to protect them from that experience. And it's really, really, really a mistake. It just is a mistake. It doesn't help and it can hurt. And I think for the social situations, the problem of course, it hurts to see your child hurting. But the problem of sort of parenting from that place of hurt, letting it be to a parent and letting it really drive your behavior, is that it reinforces their sense that what's happening to them is indeed a terrible, terrible thing that must be responded to with, big guns of emotion, and not, what, this happens to so many people. That sucks. That's painful. Oh, it happens all the time at your age. Like what can you do to feel better in the moment? And then what can you try to understand or do to maybe feel better tomorrow? Giving them agency rather than reinforcing their feeling of being up against huge forces of evil in the form of, some quote unquote mean girl, where there's just no hope. Like, this is the way it is. That's just not helpful. But again, honestly, and I'm not saying this to do publicity for the book, I'm just saying this honestly, before researching it, writing it, learning what I learned, I did not have any vocabulary to substitute for what I just said.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think parents are not prepared. They're not aware, or the research or the expert knowledge doesn't get to the parent. There's multiple things going on. I think books like this can make a difference. The conversation that we're having can make a difference for parents to change their lens, see from a different angle, have a different perspective, and start communicating even with their children slightly differently, being aware of the themes that we raised in this conversation. What would you say to the middle schoolers of today versus them in the past? People always make those kind of remarks that it's worse now than it was before. I want you to say a few things about the universal aspect of this age, the cultural, and maybe some specific aspects of it, if possible.
People always do think that things are getting worse and worse, and that the kids are getting up to things that we never could have imagined, and the threats are greater than ever before. That's simply untrue. The kids themselves, in and of themselves, are the same. I mean, this is a universal life stage, the start of puberty. There are hardwired components to it, and as a result, there are universal things that happen at this point in development. But culturally, as societally, I think that these kids are in a much better place. They're coming up in a much better environment, at least than the one that I knew in the late 70s. And I would say, frankly, than the one that existed in this country in previous decades, which tend to be looked back on as kind of the golden years, let's say, of childhood and innocent, a more innocent, kinder time. It was not more innocent and kind for Black people or for immigrants, who weren't white, or for anyone who was gay, or certainly trans, we didn't even talk about.
Or people with disabilities.
Or people with disabilities. I mean, anyone who didn't conform to a very, very narrow, white, middle class American ideal, or norm, I guess, quote unquote norm. It was not a better time. So, and the moralism, the slut shaming, all of these things of the past were far worse. So, and they're better still now than they were when I was growing up in the 70s, even though, it was the post-civil rights era, post-feminist era, all of that. And I think that's worth remembering. Adults are much more concerned with bullying now. There is, at least generally, it breaks down all the time. It's very imperfect, but there is a sense that bullying is intolerable. It is not just an acceptable part of, boys will be boys or kids are mean or whatever, that it's something that has to be, where something has to be done about it. Once again, we don't uphold that ideal all the time, but at least it exists in the culture at large. We tend to at least want to encourage kids' individuality now, as opposed to their conformity, which, I mean, back in the 1950s, the idea that conformity was a bad thing pretty much didn't exist, other than, on the fringes, on the real alternative fringes. And that's true. You could see this 30s, 40s, 50s in child psychology. You wanted your child to be popular. You wanted your child to be like everybody else, to be normal. These were not ideas that were made fun of at that point. And that was really oppressive for so many. So I think there's, and our social norms around expressing racism, homophobia, all of that have changed, at least in many communities. I think that we definitely went through a worse period over the past, since 2015, let's say. You saw this in, many middle school principals, teachers were reporting an upsurge in racist speech and anti-immigrant speech. And hopefully we will start to be on a better path again soon. That's very regrettable. But I think a lot of people have seen the dangers of that, and they will double down in pushing back against that.
Yeah. I can see, like, observing my own daughter, hearing her conversations and just being in conversations with her, how mature and smart they are, aware of those things, and how tolerant they are, as opposed to when I was growing up, receiving bullying, because I was wearing glasses and things like that. Like, children now are better at treating children with differences, disabilities, gay, and all of those things. Children are more aware and tolerant and more accepting. I think I see that. Yeah.
And they're way out ahead of their parents.
Yes.
You really see it around gender identity, where, that is a very big issue for this generation of young people. I wouldn't just say children. And I see, in Facebook groups, and just in general, older people calling the entire phenomenon into question and saying, isn't it just a trend? Isn't it just a form of rebellion, and just negating what is very real and true for these kids. And I think it's the same with talk about racial justice and equity. They are part of a much, much more diverse generation than any that has come before. And so the notions of racial justice come more naturally to them. I think an awareness, let's say, of structural racism comes more naturally to them, because they are with kids who aren't all the same, as was so much more the case, certainly for baby boomers. And also, they're talking about these things in school. We're talking about these things as a culture. And all of that, I think, is very good. And then, when it comes to the behaviors that parents fear the most, drinking, drugs, sex, that kind of thing, the statistics are better, much better now than they were in the 80s and early 90s. Things have gotten better. Kids that age have become more childlike. Some of that, ironically enough, is due to the fact that they're online more and less in each other's company and actually physically getting up to things. So I just think it's important for parents to know that, to sort of temper the panic a bit.
Yeah, those fears or those panics are exaggerated in many cases. So true. The other day, my daughter, I said something and she's like, Mom, that's a very sexist remark. I'm like, wow. And I'm like, okay. It's very interesting. They're aware of so many things and they know.
And we have to be able to tolerate being called out. I mean, I think that's something that makes a lot of parents very angry.
Yeah.
And very often the kids are being unfair to us. They're sort of policing our speech to a level that goes beyond anything real, but it's an opportunity to listen. It is an opportunity to listen and hear where they are and what they've learned, and then find ways to sort of articulate politely and respectfully to them what our own positions are and how our views were formed and where we come from. And those are conversations that are worth having. We don't have to speak the exact same language and agree on absolutely everything, but we can treat their views with respect and sort of teach them how to listen to other people and actually hear them.
Yeah, I remember from that period of my life, the people who respected my intellectual free thought pattern, who didn't say, no, that's not right. The teachers, particularly, there were a few teachers that I still remember. Those were the ones who probably understood that these are important things. This child is forming her own thoughts. And those thoughts and ideas were very extreme sometimes, right? Where if you don't believe in God, it has to be like this, strong point, because you haven't calibrated yet as a middle schooler. Everything is so technical, or everything is so bright and strong and intense, and it sort of mellows down as you age. But I think because of that, our reactions to what they are saying, what they're wearing, what they're doing, our reactions don't have to be to that of that magnitude,
No, I mean, I think part of the reason that they do express themselves in such a kind of overblown, pompous, often way, as you said earlier, is because their identity is so wrapped up in these positions. It's their entire selfhood is at stake in what they say, and you see this, I think, for quite a few years in adolescence. But ours doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So true.
I think it's very hard when they disagree with us at that age, or they say to us that we are hypocrites, or they say to us whatever. It hurts. I mean, it's just sort of, how dare you say these things to me? But we have to be able to insist on respect. I think that we are within our rights to, insist on respectful conversation, but also be able to tolerate different views, because otherwise we're just shutting them down. I'm realizing that I have another
you have to go. Yes,
interview at 12:30.
Yeah, I will let you go. Yes, for sure.
It was just wonderful speaking with you. I like I said earlier, when you started talking about the book, I feel so seen in all the things that I was trying to do with it, and that's just a great feeling. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for writing it. I can't imagine how much work you've put into it.
Thank you for saying that.
It definitely shows. It definitely shows.
Thank you.
And I appreciate this book. I will refer back to it. So thank you for being here today. I will be happy to have you again if you're willing. Or
sure, I would love to.
Yeah,
I hope that we will stay in touch. And our interests are so similar that I would just love to have the opportunity to speak more.
Thank you so much, Judith. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. As you could tell, I was very excited about this conversation, and it brought up so many great memories for me. It's also valuable as I am a mom of a middle schooler and I'm right in the thick of it with you if you're raising a middle schooler. Of course, as always, I want to hear from you. I want to know your biggest takeaway. You can get in touch with me. I always love hearing from you. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number and leave a voicemail, or I can just simply answer the phone if you catch me at the right time, 732-763-2576. And for you, my lovely international listener, I have a special tool. It's free. It's on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. I want to give a shout out to two lovely people who signed up to support the show on patreon.com, Roberta and Nakana. I am sending your gifts and I can't wait for you to receive the Authentic Parenting tote bag and the mug and use it. You're so special for me. I know who you are, both of you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for supporting the show, for believing in me, and just being my distant friend. We have 13 patrons as of today. And if you would like to support the show, please go to patreon.com and search for Authentic Parenting or Anna Seewald, and you can see my page. Also, the link is in your show notes. I continue offering my weekly free support calls for parents, the pandemic parenting support calls, and they happen every week by Zoom, and I would love it if you could join us. If you need more information, let me know. Join our Facebook group to keep up to date with information. Currently, we are doing a 7-day spring technology detox challenge. And boy, it's a tough one. But many of the members are doing the challenge. They're texting me, messaging me daily about their progress. And I am so proud of the people who are taking on this tough challenge. The day one prompt was delete all social media from your phone. So if you're up for challenges like this, you definitely want to join our Facebook group. Also, we have a new offering. Instead of the book club, now we are doing a putt club because it turns out many people don't have time to read a book or finish a book. But since you are listening to the podcast and would love to discuss the episodes with your fellow listeners and me, and sometimes the author or the guest of the episode, please let me know, or again, join the Facebook community or my mailing list so that you can be notified of the next event, which will be in May, maybe the 3rd Thursday of May. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.